Hi, wanted to do a training on the use of the Mini-CEX rubrics. The rubrics have changed a couple of times for Mini-CEX, and we'll get into the reasons of that and kind of the nature of the Mini-CEX rubrics here. But basically, the Mini-CEX clinical assessment tool is a tool that is uh, a score is given straight from the information of the rubrics. And so the rubric is really the important essential part in doing the observation, but also giving the score, giving feedback, and seeing improvement also. So with the Minicex rubrics, just going down kind of the development of the rubrics here, each category has an associated description and rubric. And so when we do the training on each of the rubrics, I'm also going to go through the description of each of the Minicex categories. And this should give you an idea of what clinical tasks and skills can be used to do evaluations for the interns. I want to keep that very open on what kind of tasks can be used to evaluate those skills. But each description and rubric was created and is mapped to I'm not sure why that 8 is there, but to the 2018 CCE meta competencies. And so these are tightly bound and associated with the 2018 CCE meta competencies, to most notably to the clinical outcomes that each of the graduates need to show before they graduate. And it's really designed to see not only that they've accomplished each clinical outcome, but we actually see a qualitative improvement through try 8, try 9, and try 10. And so each CCE metacompetency has a series of student clinical outcomes that must be met. I went over that already. That's really our goal and our mission, but not to make it a check mark of yes or no, did they do it? But as I said before, we don't want to just have them do the outcomes and try 8 and maybe in try 9, and then they don't need to do it anymore and not really also worry about the quality. We want to make sure that they're doing these skills and outcomes throughout their clinical courses and their clinical practice experience, but also probably more importantly, that they are progressively improving in their competency and hopefully getting to the point that they experience some advanced clinical education and advanced clinical skills within the education here at National. And Mini-CEX rubrics includes those clinical outcomes as part of evidencing clinical competency in National DC students. That's really the essence of Mini-CEX, and it's one of the tools that we use to evidence competency. Mini-CEX and its rubrics are the basis for being just one of the tools that evidence student clinical competency. I think we went over that. And so Mini-CEX helps not only to make sure that we are doing all those outcomes, but again, that we're doing qualitative improvement throughout the trimesters. So the nature of Mini-CEX rubrics is we have a 9-point rubric, and I have to start by saying that this is kind of the original form of the Mini-CEX rubric. We went from filling in all the spaces for the 9-point rubric, and then we changed it to actually having open spaces for these rubrics, meaning that we have open spaces for 8, 7, 5, 4, and 2. And I want to look at look at an example of a rubric and show you why that has happened, and how that is actually maybe an improvement from previous. So we have an incremental description. I'm sorry, the previous incremental description was way too small for significant changes between the scores. And so this gives the evaluator, the clinician, the instructor to assess, have a little bit more liberty in their assessment. But the rubrics does use the statements, intern performance represented a slight diminish from this score, or the intern's performance represented a slight improvement from that score. And so that gives, like I said, a little bit of liberty and freedom to say, hey, it was better than a 6, but it was lower than a 7, or vice versa. Um, so the use of these open spaces and slight diminishment and improvement help the clinician again to choose the score when maybe the score that actually has a description is partially obtained. Maybe it was better than that score, or maybe it was lower than a higher score. And so um, it's one of the things that I think will help out versus having a description for each of the scores. Um, so the score, and this is a very important point, the score that is given when we do observation, when we do an assessment on a mini-CEX assessment needs to reflect the score on the category rubric. We're not just giving a score because of a certain trimester. We're not giving a score because we think that we just have to go through the quote unquote numbers of the clinical requirements. We are really basing our score on the rubric. And it's not something that we have to read the rubric each and every time that we do an assessment, but we have to continually be familiar with the rubric and the requirements of each of the category rubrics. And so that's what I would ask of you to read these rubrics and to be very familiar with the rubrics uh, when we do these assessments. There's a couple of different ways that we can conceptualize scores to help us score faster, so we're not reading the rubric each and every time that we do an assessment. There's a couple of ways that will make it easier. The first is that we can categorize the rubric by superior, satisfactory, and needs improvement scores. And I think from all of our clinical background, we can categorize these skills. And I want to add that the rubrics have been designed so that the clinical competency fit these categories also. But there's also trimester standards that we have per rubric uh, that can be followed too. We still need to know and follow the rubric, but uh, the scores are also the standards for the trimesters too, and we'll get into that and what I mean. And that may help you to give a score each time, depending on we that we know the standard for each trimester. First off, the superior, satisfactory, and needs improvement scores. The mini-CEX scores of 9, 8, and 7 can be categorized as superior. Superior clinical competency skill for the intern. Um, 9 is really a physician that's been out in the field for 2 to 3 years. 7 is what we would give for uh, a graduating national grad. And so we want to keep that in mind also, that superior, just the lower edge of superior is really should be the standard for an NUHS DC grad. Satisfactory is, I think, where most of our Tri 7, Tri 8, and Tri 9 students kind of reside. They're still learning, but their clinical skills are improving. So 6, 5, and 4 are satisfactory. And then 3, 2, and 1 are our needs improvement scores. These are not failure scores. These may be scores that are given to try 1 through try 6 um, as they are improving in their clinical skills. Or if we do have an intern that is really needs to study, really needs to do some self-disciplined practice, one of these scores may be needed to be given to make sure that the next time they come in, they are motivated to actually give a superior performance of that clinical task, especially if the intern is maybe not responding. These scores may be needed to be given. The other conceptual ways that we can help to give scores is through trimester standards. Again, trimester 7, our standards is going to be 4. Trimester 8, our standard score given is 5. trimester 9 is 6, and trimester 10 is 7. Now, these are not the thresholds, the given thresholds for the student per category. That might be different. However, when they get up to the specific trimester, we're going to expect the intern to perform at the level of that score, at the level of the score of the rubric. And so the rubrics are always given to the intern as a reference. And so they can read that rubric, they can see this is the level that I really need to perform at, or higher. And so that rubric and the descriptions can give a lot of information to the student. And again, I can't reiterate this enough. The assessment scores need to be based off of the rubrics. Because why? Because these rubrics are based off of the meta competencies that need to be evidenced also. There are variations in the rubric scores, and again, we'll go through these with each of the rubrics and category descriptions. But things to look out for are kind of descriptions, like fully, mostly, somewhat, or absence, thoroughly, regularly, partially, or did not perform, most, all, maybe a small portion, or even none. Um, some of the rubric descriptions will say no corrections were given, or maybe minimal corrections were given as part of that rubric score description, or assistance. Maybe there was no assistance given, there was minimal assistance given, there was maximal assistance was needed for this. And one thing to remember also when we're talking about giving scores and descriptions of the rubric, uh, that we're not expecting the students and the interns to perform these skills and tasks on their own without corrections and without assistance. I think uh, that would defeat the purpose, I think, of the clinical practice instruction and improvement. And so some corrections, some assistance is always expected. However, it's not the responsibility to give kind of lectures or constant instruction, but to give brief, meaningful feedback with hopefully some references of how they can actually do a self-discipline study with the intern. And so hopefully that gives you a little bit more information on the nature of the rubric and how to give scores, and some ways that will make scoring a little bit easier. Again, 3 to 5 minutes, 3 to 5 categories per patient encounter. Uh, we went through an overview, a flow of assessment. I'm going to give an explanation of each rubric category, hopefully the description, and then also going through entering Mini-CEX scores and feedback. Before I do that, I promised that I would uh, have us look at a rubric. So let's go ahead and do that as the last thing that we will do, because I did want to show, and again, all of you will have access to these rubrics, but I did want to show what I meant by these empty spaces. Previously with these rubrics, we had these descriptions, just small changes per score. And so with 9, we had this description, and then 8, we had the same description, just very, very different. That caused a little bit of problem, and now we have these kind of not empty spaces, but now we have more freedom to show, was it maybe a slight diminishment or maybe a slight improvement from these scores. And again, we're not focusing on 9 here, but if I could zoom in a little bit, we're focusing mostly on kind of these 4, 5, 6, and 7 here, especially with our clinical practice and in our clinical courses. And so for this, we could focus on 6 and that description that we have. Was it better than 6 in some aspects? With 7, giving a score of 7, was a little bit decreased or diminished from 6? Do we give a score of 4? Maybe our reference for giving a score of 4 is reading 3 and seeing uh, the kind of the content of 3 and saying, look, the intern really did better than this. So I may want to give a 4. However, was it a 5? Well, I'm going to read the contents here and really know the contents and like, well, it wasn't as good as a 6. So I'm going to stick with a 5 here. And so this, again, gives the evaluator, the assessor, the clinician, the instructor more freedom to do uh, the to give scores and to give improvement or give feedback for improvement and to help with that progressive improvement of the intern. And so again, any questions, please reach out to me. I want to make sure that everyone understands these correctly. And so here's my information. Any questions at all, please let me know.